We have some great questions from our audience for our panelists, and I think we'll get started with those. Please feel free to continue typing so our team up here can continue to work on your responses. And the first question is going to go to Clinton Climate Initiative. Specifically, what does the Clinton Climate Initiative offer that's new and different from previous ESCOs? And in particular, how will the payback periods compare?
Hello? Can you hear me? Is there another mic? Should I just do? Hello?
I think this one.
All right.
Is yours turned on?
Is it all right if I just okay. So the question was, how is the CCI different from, I think, other ESCOs, and in particular, how are the payback periods different? First of all, just for clarification, CCI isn't taking the place of an energy service company. We're partnered with energy service companies and have signed agreements with them. And essentially what we're doing is we're encouraging more transparency, more security for building owners' interests than had previously existed before, and we're providing ongoing quality control throughout the process. So some of the stipulations in our MOU include things like guaranteed maximum price, minimum annual savings requirements each year as described by the building owner, and making sure that that language is in the contract and in the different project development documents in the right place, and open book pricing so that you know exactly what you're paying for and where the money is going, and that there's as much transparency as possible. And as far as the payback periods are concerned, we're always in favor of longer payback periods. And the simplest answer is that if we can reduce some of the transaction costs, if we can increase ESCO volume of work enough that they're willing to maybe take on lower margins for their profits, if we can get our purchasing alliance product discounts folded into a project, then we can essentially, for the same payback period, allow for deeper retrofit projects because the cost per item is going to be reduced. And I mean that's the basic answer there. And there are two other questions relevant to CCI that I'll just touch on briefly. Sorry, go ahead, please.
I just want to comment on that question, and that is that people have this belief that there's some sort of magic and mystery involved in this kind of thing. And this is all simple and quantifiable. So you take out one light bulb that runs 100 watts and you stick in one that's 60 watts, so that's 40 watts. And then you know how much it costs for that. And the audit that happens, the investment grade energy audit, goes through any building, looks at every single energy consuming item one by one, and you get a report back. It's a book that shows you that item, shows you what the cost for the change out is, and it shows you, so if it cost $1 and you're saving 25 cents a year, so it takes 4 years to pay that back. It's just that simple as a thing to do, and that's fully within your control. So you can look at the book and you go through with a highlighter and you identify, I want to do that, I want to do that, no, I don't want to do that, because that pays back in 13 years, but this one pays back in 7 years. I like that, that's okay. So this is totally within your control, not anybody else's control, not the ESCO's control, your control as the customer for doing this. And then you can make the decision if you like that payback or not. One of the things we've been talking about in doing this is the idea that I have this feeling that for CEOs and CFOs that the question becomes, what's in it for me? And just because, yeah, it's goody two-shoes to like the environment and all of that, but CEOs and CFOs often are really dollar-oriented, believe it or not. And the reality is that a simple payback kind of mechanism done in an appropriate kind of way, and the factors, again, are not complex, can actually give you cash back up front. So you can save 10%, 20% on your energy bill the year after you do the thing if you structure the agreement right. And what that means is that the length of the payback just stretches out a little longer. It's simple arithmetic. It's the simple financing we all know to do that. So people have been saying this is too complex, it's difficult, and in my mind, it is really pretty straightforward as a way to take it on. And often the question comes up from CEOs that I've dealt with, it's like, what should I do first? What's the thing, if I really want to make a commitment and do something, what should I do? What's the very first thing I should do? The answer becomes, do an investment-grade energy audit. Any of the ESCOs that are listed on Jonathan's slide have the capability to come in for you, do that analysis, give you the book, and then you can choose. You can decide what you want to do or not do, as the case may be.
Thank you. Do any of the panelists have any major do's or don'ts to tell us about in dealing with performance audits, performance contracts?
If I can just jump in and say one very important do is before you get into the procurement process, issue your RFQ and start talking to ESCOs, know what you want your financial and operational goals for your financial and operational goals. Know what kind of criteria you want to set. Like, do you want that kind of cash back in year one solution? Do you want a payback term of 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? What is the maximum price that you're willing to pay for the entire project, and translated to being what is the maximum you're willing to borrow? What is the maximum you can borrow? And what kind of goals do you want to realize through the project operationally? What is the, do you want to achieve a certain percentage energy reduction? Do you want to incorporate renewables somehow? And figure out what those things are specifically and put those into your procurement documents so that you start talking about them with the ESCOs on day one. Otherwise, you can get yourself into the process, and the ESCOs might be reporting back things in the investment grade audit and elsewhere that, who knows whether it's going to suit your needs and your desires. And then it becomes just a longer and more difficult process to actually get to a project. So put some thought into the process before you engage in the procurement, and put some thought into the goals you want to achieve before you get engaged into the procurement. That's one of the most critical do's, I think.
Other comments?
I would like to comment on the one question here about can we justify 40% of the utility use into the hands of faculty, staff, and students? I would suspect that the bulk of the infrastructure in the management and administration of the utilities at this present time in America is going to be no. That's a transformation very difficult to do. However, with that question, because they are powerless to the ROI and or priority scheme, I would like to only comment, I like the question. It's a good one, because that should be the university's goal. You're not only the platform of learning, but it's time you learn and live by demonstration of what you should teach. You are teaching America's future, so the next graduation should be a tidal wave or epidemic of changing in beliefs. So I think that for all of you, knowing how you're structured, how you're presently trying to do business with getting outside third-party people, let it be part of their responsibility to assist you in transforming that very question, and that is that the students and the faculty will now begin to have a lot to say and a lot of involvement in the scheduling of a building. Remember that a building, because it don't have wheels and wings, doesn't mean it doesn't fly. It doesn't roll. It does. As an aeronautical engineer, in fact, I see hundreds of wind tunnels in buildings called blowers and motors. And obviously I see fluids in motion, millions of gallons a minute, an hour running around. I see steam flash into condensate, and it didn't get back to the boiler. It's down the drain. The water consumption's huge. So as you do become part of the design intent under sustainability, it will be the faculty and the students, I found, to make a huge difference of, hey boss, why are we not doing this? So I think that's a very good question, and that transformation is very easy to do if the will on the campus is there to do it.
Ed, we have a question for you. How many waterless urinals does the University of Florida have installed?
I don't know, but Mom, can you hear me? This is one of those interesting live and learn questions that, yes, we've installed a number of waterless urinals, and yes, they do not work. And yes, we've had to take them out, and yes, we've done a lot of damage to buildings that were not designed adequately to take on this new technology. And yes, the filters cost a lot of money, and yes, treating those filters, use a lot of chemicals, and so we learned a lot, and we're learning from that and moving on, but that was a lesson learned early on when we jumped to the new solution that we've got some work to do there. So.
Thank you, Ed. We, too, have installed waterless urinals and taken them back out and put in low-volume ones, and it, too, for our institution, was a real process of learning. We have a question about LEED, and the question is that LEED silver may cost more than not certifying a building at all. Does anybody want to comment on that? Go for it.
There are a series of myths in the realm of sustainability, and this is one of those myths. And several years ago, this might have been true, but the changes in the marketplace today, the expertise in the architectural engineering community and the construction community is getting such that it does not cost any more to build sustainably certified silver, gold, or platinum. It does not cost any more if you make the decision up front that that's what you want to do. If you make the decision late in the process, it's going to cost way more. There's going to be rework, materials replaced, and all that kind of thing. But if you make the decision right up front before you start, when you're in programming on the building, many places now do what's called the eco-charrette at the very beginning to establish sustainable goals for that particular facility. And once that's done and that's the direction set, there's no additional cost. There's been a broad range of development of materials that are available now that are highly sustainable, that meet the needs in lots of ways. Hearing Ray Anderson, my friend, talk, Ray participated in a competition for a contract that I had for carpeting, that we wanted to have a highly sustainable carpet. And the carpet that we finally are buying did not happen to come from Ray, but one of his friendly competitors. And that carpet turned out to cost us $15 a square yard. We had been paying $30 a yard before we did the competition. It happened to be a very large contract, which helped drive the price down. But that contract is piggybackable by any other entity in the United States. $15 a yard. It's the most sustainable carpet available today in the world. So that's cheap. And when you think about sustainability generally and the idea that there are things that you don't do, carpeting is great. I mean, we all like carpeting, but a lot of cases you don't need carpeting. That a nicely stained concrete floor does just fine. Or the idea you don't have to put in ceiling tiles, that does fine. And just by the very logic of that, if you don't put in the carpeting, don't put in the ceiling tiles, cost less because you're not using materials. That's the reality of sustainability. So the idea that, there's been this myth out there that doing a sustainable building costs more, not the case.
Ed, would you like to say a little bit about your experience with LEED and EB?
I think early on LEED had a bad reputation for costing more, and I agree that it doesn't have to cost more. But I would also caution you, LEED has 6 categories. You can target certain categories that do not cost a lot more. But if you're really going to be aggressive with today's buildings, you need to go after the more expensive LEED guidance, and that would be in the energy category where you can spend some more. But we have found that return on investment is quick return, and its life cycle costs are big. So don't shy away from investing a little more in the building, because with the energy costs today, here again I'm back on the return on investment, it's worthwhile.
I'd like to I'd like to add one more thought there. I was building two buildings at the same time, one aiming for LEED and one that was being done by an outside partner on a very tight timeline that was not done with the idea of doing LEED, going through the whole process of LEED certification. And I ran into the issue of contractor accountability big time. The second contractor claimed they were following LEED. In hindsight, I really regret not going for certification because our documentation was just not there to indicate that the contractor was indeed as accountable as the contractor should have been. So I've become a firm proponent, and in terms of building operation costs, we're definitely finding the first building that went for LEED Silver is a much more efficient building to operate than the building that was just, quote, touted to meet LEED standards. We have some themes that have come from your discussions, and we'd like to put those up and share them with you right now. The first of these is the effective footprint reduction strategies, and we have three major themes that came out of your discussions. The first, dematerialization, create upstream solutions to reduce waste and reduce resource consumption. The second, to install or institute submeterings, motion sensor, power management, vendor misers, and other kinds of temperature setbacks for buildings. And the third, to develop behavioral change processes that help the campus community conserve and use less energy. Next, we have GEMS with regard to the effective reduction strategies. Shut them down. Decrease space utilization of buildings. When you don't need the space, get rid of it. Secondly, education and action campaign on a per building basis that provides continuous real-time data on energy and waste for each individual building. I know I just talked to the occupants of a couple of buildings who thought they were doing a great job about the fact that they were number one and number two on campus in terms of energy use. They were quite shocked. We'll see if their behavior changes. But those are gems. Okay, themes on cultural and financial challenges. First of all, an overemphasis on upfront costs versus the long-term investment in the building with regard to operations. Secondly, silos between capital cost and operating cost in budget management and planning can be an issue. Third, how do you determine the accuracy of data on costs? How do we know what to believe? Too often, the tactical wins versus strategic design and intent. Dealing with energy is free as an attitude is an issue. And lastly, the problem of instant gratification and me-ism are all challenges for us on cultural and financial operations of buildings. And lastly, GEMS in terms of cultural and financial challenges. Undue influence of political legislators who want and need to protect companies whose interest is in maintaining the status quo. So let's all remember to look past the status quo. Well, in summary, I want to thank you for participating in this panel. Remember, your campus can be treated as a classroom in its entirety. The folks in facilities and operations love working with students, and I've seen them do an outstanding job in the classroom. And there's nothing like connecting students with the practical of what goes on campus. We all know that we can learn from our students, and our students are leading us in terms of agreeing to put charges on their tuition to help make some of these changes that we know is so important, but the students are even willing to help fund. Please think about your development offices as you move forward, too. This is a great thing for development offices to hear about and to understand that there's savings in sustainability. If we save the money, the development office doesn't have to raise it, but they may well be able to use some of our savings as a way to leverage money from potential donors. So with this, I want to thank our panelists for their participation in this panel and thank all of you for being here. We have refreshments outside.